Welcome back to the PHP project training series. This is Mike King. We're going to wrap up this part 4 of our building a page hit counter using PHP. Please notice the disclaimer on the bottom of this page. I've been asked quite a bit about reuse of some of the material that we have on the website. It's came up a lot when I was doing the Focus on Flash site. So I've now supplied a link. If you're an educator and you want to reuse some of the material from the site, all you have to do is send me an email at support@ontargethtml5.com. And the subject line should be permission to reuse. It will get routed directly to me, and then I can review why you want to review it or reuse it, I should say. And I'll get back to you as quick as I can with an email. Just supply a valid email request. All right, building a PHP hit counter part 4. So let's add some administrative functions to our hit counter using PHP. In the last 3 tutorials, we built a very simple hit counter. Then we went on to build a more advanced hit counter that actually tracks the pages that we're actually viewing on our site. We wrote that into a flat text file, and I was going to actually close out the tutorials after that, and then I got to thinking, I said, honestly, on dynamic websites, because that's mainly what I do, is dynamic websites, and the sites I design for business, we always have some type of administrative function on those sites so that the admins can go in and see what kind of data they're getting back. They don't go in and actually read a flat text file. They actually go in and pull out a page, and it usually has all the admin stuff on that page for them. So I thought, it'd be kind of cool to add that to this tutorial. So let's go ahead and add that functionality to what we've just done. So what I want to do, the steps we're going to follow, we're going to create an admin.php file. Then we're going to add a link from our index page to access that admin file. Then we're going to view that admin panel so that you can actually see what kind of information comes back from the admin file. And then I want to do a small demonstration on CSS and how you can actually use CSS. And especially now with CSS3, there's a lot more functionality in CSS, but how you can use just a few short lines of CSS to really spice up the way a page looks. And if you're not familiar with CSS, this will give you a real quick introduction to it. All right, so let's go ahead and go bring in or create that admin.php file. I'm going to go ahead and drop out of this presentation. First thing I want to do is I want to make certain that our XAMPP control panel is up and running, our web server is up and running, so that when we bring up our browser, we actually have a valid website we can go to test our pages. So I do have my XAMPP up and running. Go ahead and minimize that. Let's go ahead and open up our browser window. Again, we're in our local host inside our PHP Hit Counter directory. Now I'm going to go ahead and open up my text editor, Sublime Text 2. So we've got everything on our desktop to go. And the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and create this admin.php file. So I'm going to go back into the exercise folder. That's part of the exercise files. If you've purchased the tutorial online, you'll actually have this in your exercise folder. If not, I will stop and give you time to go ahead and copy this or type this into your document. I'm going to go ahead and copy that using Control-C. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that panel. Getting into my text editor, I'm going to do a Control-V to paste that into my text editor. And just relax. I'm going to go ahead and get it set up so that we got our word wrap set up. And one thing I noticed I did forget, I forgot my doc type. And in HTML5, you always want to have a doc type declaration. So we're going to put our HTML5 doc type declaration up top. Let's get that HTML page down there. Very good. So now we got everything set up. Got my PHP started, my hitcount.txt for my script. And everything looks good. So let me go ahead and save this file as admin.php. And I want to save this since the majority of this file, let's stop this for 1 second. Think about what we're doing here. Now, normally this is a standard PHP page. It's going to be an admin page that's going to run my counts from my flat text file. So I'm going to save this in the root directory as admin.php. So let's go ahead and save this in the root directory of our PHP hit counter. And I want to call admin.php. Hit save. Now, if I refresh this browser window, you'll notice now there's our admin file. It's come up inside of our root of that folder. I also want to bring up my index.php page because I've got to have a way to get to this, to actually get to this admin page. So let's go ahead and open that up. Say open file. Let's go open up our index.php. And right at the bottom of page 4, let's go ahead and copy this link. Paste that in place. I want to actually change this to page 4 because we forgot to do that on the last exercise. And now right here, what I want to do is I want to load the admin.php page. So on this link, I'm going to have admin.php and I'm going to change our display text to administration. This way we can actually administer the site from this particular link. The only place I'm going to put this link is on the index page. I don't want this to show up on every page of our site, just on the index page itself. Save all. One thing I do want to explain, when you're doing this on a real website, in a real environment, normally this would not be displayed. You would only see this admin link if you had logged in and you'd set up a session variable to check whether the person that's on that index page is logged in. If they were logged in and they were a valid administrative user, this would appear on the menu. If they were not, it would not appear on the menu. And we will have tutorials in PHP on how to set up users and how to set up session variables, but that's not part of this tutorial. It's a little bit too deep for what we're doing here. This is just to demonstrate that we could have an admin page to display all our functionality. Okay, so we set up our admin.php file, and we've made a change to the index file where we can actually access that file. Let's go ahead and save all our work. And now let's go in and talk a little bit about this admin.php file. All right, you'll notice I've closed out our split screen because we do have a lot of data in this particular PHP admin file. I went ahead and closed out the split screen. Now would be a great time for you to pause this video if you don't have a copy of the exercise files, so that you can type the code that we currently have on the screen. And what I would do is I would type down to the array multi-sort where it says display results right there. Type to that point. All right, good. So now we've got that. Let me go ahead and scroll up so you can get the rest of the code. Again, great time for you to pause this video so you can actually get down the rest of this code. Then we're going to go back to the top of the code and we'll discuss what we're doing with this admin.php file. So now would be a good time to pause the video to finish typing in the code. Okay, let's talk about what we've done with this admin.php file. First thing I want you to know is, okay, we set up our regular standard doc type. This is an HTML5 document. We set up the doc type, got our HTML, we've got our header information, we have a title for this particular page. We close out our head, we start a body tag, and right inside the body tag, we open up PHP tags. Because what we're going to do in this particular document is I'm actually going to have the HTML as part of the PHP file. And you'll see this a lot with web developers. And as we walk through the code, I'll explain to you what I'm doing. So the first thing I do is I create a file name variable. And in that file name, I load our hitCount.txt file. The same file that we used in the previous advanced hit counter, we're going to use the data from that hit counter for our administrative page. Now, something I didn't do before is I'm setting this variable I to 0. I'm going to use I in a counter when we get inside of our loop, because I'm actually going to have a loop going on here as we start putting this stuff together, and I'm going to use that I as a counter, so I need to initialize that variable, so I do it and assign it a value of 0. Now, the first thing we're actually going to see on the web page is right here. I am going to echo to my browser window an H1 tag, which is a title tag that says our PHP Hit Counter. So that's going to be the title of our page. I'm going to come down and I'm going to use an if statement. I'm going to check the file size of the file name variable to ensure that it's greater than 0. Remember, this file name variable that we created right here, this is holding our text file. If that file size is greater than 0, I'm going to execute the stuff that's inside this if statement. Because remember, this has got to evaluate true in order for me to execute this data. So now the first thing I do is I'm going to create a handle variable, and I'm going to open up the file name as a read-only. So I open up file name as for read-only, and then while I'm not at the end of the file, so in other words, I'm looking at that file that I just opened up, I put inside the handle variable, and as long as I'm not at the end of the file, I'm going to create a variable called buffer. I'm going to trim that white space just like we did before using the fget, so line by line, I'm going to walk through there, trim out all the white space and any special characters. If the string length buffer is greater than 0, I'm going to create a list called pages with using that number I, and count using that number I. So every time this goes through, you're going to notice I'm going to increment that variable, but I'm going to put together a list, and it's going to have the page name, 0, and the count, 0. And this is basically what it's called. It's an index of the array. Again, look at the essential training series on arrays, but that's exactly what we're doing here is we're pulling out the pages with array index and the count with array index. I'm looking at a total of that count, and then I'm incrementing the number to go through the next value in the array. Arrays are zero based, so I'll start out with 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, and so on. Once I get all that information built, I'm going to go ahead and close out that handle using the fclose function that we talked about in an earlier tutorial. Then I'm going to put together what's called an array multisort. I'm going to take the variable count. I'm going to sort that variable descending using the pages. These are 3 attributes that go with the array multisort. And again, taking the count variable, I'm going to do a sort by descending order with my pages. And now you'll notice I've got a lot of echo statements because now what I'm getting ready to do is I'm getting ready to echo the information that I've just put together onto our browser display. So the first thing I do is I'm going to echo a p tag. I'm assigning it a class of info, and you'll see what we use that for when we get into the CSS. And I'm giving it a total hits. I'm putting in a line break. I'm making this bold. I'm adding a number format function to the total. Another line break and closing out the paragraph tag. So it's basically a total hits. And I'm pulling the total hits of all the pages that I've got inside my array. Then I'm echoing a table. I'm actually going to build a table. So I put in a table tag. I echo a table row and a table header file name. I close out that header, open up another header and hits. So I'm going to have 2 column titles or column headings in this table. One of them's file name, one of them's hits. And now I'm setting up another for loop. I say j is equal to 0 if j is greater than I, j++. And I want to echo through a table row where I'm actually going to pull in the text for the pages, and I'm going to pull in the number for the count. So I'm going to see all the numbers that I have as it relates to the page. I'm going to close out that table row with this echo tag. I'm also going to close out the table. If none of this occurs, in other words, if I don't have a file size greater than 0, I'm going to echo to the screen, no statistics are recorded yet. And I'm just going to drop out of the page. So I'll get one little display across the screen telling me there are no statistics in that text file. And it will drop out and we'll be done with it. And that's all there is to this file. I mean, a lot of the stuff we've already gone through in the previous tutorials. There are a few new functions that we talked about here. File size, array multisort, and number format. And in the next part of the tutorial, I'll explain those functions, just as we've done the previous ones. All right, we've added that admin.php file into our scripts directory. Let's talk a little bit about those 3 new functions or built-in functions that we used as we were entering that code. The first one you'll notice that we used was file size. And file size gets the size for the given file that you have as an attribute inside its quotation marks. The next one we used was array multisort, and it's used to sort multidimensional arrays. There are numerous attributes that can be assigned to the attributes of this function inside the parentheses. And in fact, if you think about it, if you look at how we assigned the array multisort here, we actually have 3 different attributes. We've got a count variable that we're using, we're sorting it descending, and we're sorting the pages based on these values. So there's 3 different attributes that we're using inside that array multisort. And the last new one that we looked at number format. And that allows the formatting of displayed numbers inside PHP, because numbers normally come into PHP raw. So if you want to actually do formatting, like have decimal places or have thousands, commas, or however you want to format this number, you use the built-in function called number format to format it in PHP. All right, so let's look at the documentation really quick. I'm back at my favorite php.net website because I wanted you to see there is a lot of information, not so much on file size. That one's pretty simple. It gives you the size of the file, lets you know that whether or not you've got any value in the file size of the file that you just loaded. But so you can see what I was talking about on array multisort. Let's go and look at the array multisort description. And you'll see there are quite a few different attributes that you can actually put in this array multisort function. So I'd highly recommend, if you really want to learn how to use a lot of these particular built-in functions, is get into this documentation. It gives you a lot of examples of ways that you can use these and read about some of the stuff you can do. We're using this one relatively simple on the array multi-sort. We're basically taking in the count variable to give us a count where we're at in the array. We're sorting these descending, and then we're actually looking at the pages of that array, the physical page names in the array itself. And the last thing when we talked about is number format. It's also got a lot of interesting attributes that can be used with it. So you can actually format a number, obviously, how many decimal places, whether or not you're going to use commas, your delimiters. In other words, we can have decimal points and commas. And so again, your thousand separator, you can determine what that's going to be inside the formatting of this number. Great place for information on this particular built-in function is the documentation at the php.net website. All right, we're back to our development environment. You notice I've got our split screen back. We've got our admin.php file. On the right-hand side, this is the file that we just put together and we talked about. I've got my local host, my web browser. On the left-hand side, we've actually got the index.php page loaded. You'll notice we've got our new administrator button at the bottom that we just added to this particular page. So if everything goes as planned, let me go ahead and save everything. Everything goes as planned. If I hit this administrative button, I should see this web page come up with the display of all the different pages that are in my website with a total count plus the count for the individual pages. So let's go ahead and hit this admin button. Okay, you'll notice I've got an undefined variable. The first thing I notice is I've got an error in my code on line 20. If I look at line 20, it's telling me that undefined variable total in line 20. So it's telling me that this guy is not currently defined. So what I should have done, and again, a lot of this has to do with the version of PHP that you're using. Let's go back to the top of our code. I'm going to declare the variable with a value of 0. So now I've already got this variable declared before I go in and add this count to it. I probably could have corrected it this way, and I may have been able to correct it by just taking out this plus equal and actually making the variable assign the count right from the very beginning. So let's save all our changes. Let's go back to our local host. Let's reload our index page and go back into administration, and our variable's gone. We got that error's gone. I decided to leave that in so that you can actually see how I go about troubleshooting codes. And I think there was another way I actually could have corrected that by just taking out the plus sign, but we'll leave it as it is. We declared the variable before we used it. We should be good. One thing I did notice that I don't like about this display is I've got the total number below the hits. I'm going to go ahead and correct that, and I can fix that just by taking out this line break right here. Let's take out the line break. I'm going to add a space, so I've got a space between the total hits. In fact, let's go ahead and put a semicolon in here. Then I got a space between the total hits, my number format, and the actual total value itself. Let's save those changes, refresh this page, and now you notice we've brought the 55 up alongside of our total hits. And that's one of the reasons why I like having the development environment on the right and the browser on the left so I can see things as I go. So our admin function is actually working. Things are working quite well in this page. We can now see our pages. We see the total hits we have for the site, plus the hits for each individual page. There's a couple things that we could actually do here. We could add some formatting for our scales and formatting for our table. But one of the things I did, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, is just add some more variety to what we're doing in this tutorial. I've actually built a style sheet. So in the next portion of the tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and load that style sheet, put it in our CSS folder, and I'm going to show you how a few CSS styles can really spruce this up. All right, so let's go and spruce this up a little bit. Let's add some CSS styles to our admin page so I can show you the difference that a little bit of CSS will do on the actual presentation of your page. Remember, CSS is for cascading style sheets, and it's used to style our web pages. The OnTargetHTML5.com website is going to have a section just on CSS. So this site is going to become an all-around web development resource. Not only are we going to cover PHP, we're going to cover HTML5, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, MySQL. I want to really focus on dynamic web design because that's where everything seems to be going. So let me give you an idea of what a little bit of CSS can do. I've actually put together, and inside the exercise files, if you go ahead and purchase the tutorial, inside the exercise file, there is a style sheet called styles. I'm going to go ahead and open that file. I've already loaded it into our CSS directory. It is part of the exercise files, and I've put together just a few brief styles for this particular website. Now would be a great time for you to pause this video. Go ahead and get on down there to the table row, hover. Let me go ahead and scroll up so you can get the rest of it. And now you can, from that table row hover, you can get the rest of this. I'm going to go ahead and pause, or now would be a great time to pause the video to type the rest of this. Okay, so now you've got this style.css file that's inside, if we go back to our local host, it's inside of our CSS directory, style.css. So how do we add that to our page? Well, if you go back to that admin.php page that we typed, you'll notice inside comments, I actually have a link to a CSS style sheet. So if we remove those comments and save that admin.php file, that style sheet, that reference to that style sheet, notice it goes to our CSS directory, _CSS, and it loads the style.css file. It now loads that file to style that admin.php sheet. So let's go back to our parent directory, reload our index.php, and now select the administration function once again. Notice now our style sheet looks completely different. Those styles have actually set up a style sheet that looks much more professional on how we display that information. We're actually displaying the information now in a lot more professional environment. You notice even the hover works as I hover over these cells. It highlights the cell for me to tell me what I'm looking at. And you'll notice that inside my sort, by the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but I actually sorted these with the most hits to the fewest hits. And that was done inside of our sort descending as we sorted that array. So I wanted it to go from the highest number of hits to the lowest number of hits, and I used it based on the count. So I took the count, I sorted it descending for my pages. So it's pretty cool. So it's giving me the total hits. Again, style CSS giving me the total hits, and then it breaks down individually by page how those look. And for a reminder of how things were before the style sheet, we can just go back up here. Let's comment this back out using our less than sign, exclamation point, 2 dashes, and then my 2 dashes and a greater than sign. Save our changes. You can go back to the localhost, back to our hit counter. Let's load the index, go back to admin. So that's the difference between how it's styled by default and how it's styled with the style sheet, just by adding that line of CSS into our head section of our document, saving our changes, and refreshing our page. If I wanted to add that style sheet to any of the other pages, I could basically copy that line, go back to my index.php, and add that styles into the index.php. You'll notice we've got it right there. Just got to take out that S. It's style.css. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually tracking a version number with it. I save all my changes. Now keep in mind, I don't have a table on my index, my home sheet, my home page. I don't have a table there, but I'll still pick up the styling for the body. I'll pick up the font size, the styling for the body tag for the actual text. My text is going to be centered aligned, and if I've got H1 tags, which I believe I do, I'll pick up that styling also. So you can see how that the difference it's made looking at that. We've centered everything on the page. So I'm getting the text align center. I've got a 20 pixel margin all the way around, top, bottom, right, and left. My font sizes are 10, and my font is Arial. If I wanted to change the font size of the body style to 18, I could actually just go in there and say 18, save that change, refresh the page, and all my text style changes. So understanding CSS and how it's used can really make your web design a lot simpler. I'm going to go ahead and put this back, by the way, because that style sheet was never meant to style that index page. I just wanted to show you how easy it was to add styles to a page, and again, how easy it is to take them away. But the administrative section, we actually wrote these styles for the style sheet based on the admin page. And that's how easy it was with a few styles to really spruce up that admin page that we made for our website. Sometimes as you're doing the tutorials, I have ideas of things I want to do and I actually forgot to put something in the tutorial that I wanted to include, because while I'm writing code, and most people tend to do this, most developers tend to do this, I try to check all aspects of the code. And if you remember when we went back and we wrote our original code, I told you that in the event there is no file name, or if the file name is not greater than 0, in other words, there's no data in that text file to actually run the admin page, that actually put an else statement in here that said there's no statistics yet for this particular website. So that would be if you were to actually run this page, prior to actually bringing the site online, there was actually no statistics in the text file. What I did is I actually created a text file, hitcount1.txt, that has no data in it. In fact, you can tell it has no data in it because the file size is 0. I'm going to go in and actually add this hitcount1.txt to my admin.php file. I'm going to save that change. So now that if I go in and load this file and I bring up the administrator function, I'm going to test the else loop in this file to make certain that in the event I have nothing in my data file, it actually prints out in a paragraph tag, no statistics recorded yet. Because as you're writing code, you need to get in the habit of testing all aspects of that code. So let's go ahead and test that else loop to make sure it's working. So I'm going to bring up my index.php file. I'm going to go into the administrative function, and it tells me no statistics recorded yet. The reason it's doing that is because I'm loading this file, this hitcount1.txt. Let me go ahead and open that for you. I'm going to open that file so that you can see that there is actually no data in it. Hitcount1.txt, there's absolutely no data. If that file, when I read the file size, if it comes back and it is not greater than 0, it runs this else clause telling me no statistics recorded yet. And that's exactly what we're seeing there. So it's a great practice that as you write code, always test all the different branches of your conditional statements to make certain that things are running as they should. That's why I put that in there. I had forgotten that I wanted to test that when we were recording this tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and add this in the appropriate spot in the tutorial so that you can see that we have tested that aspect of our code. All right, so let's go back to our presentation and wrap up this tutorial. So there you have it. We built our PHP hit counter. We started out with a very simple hit counter. As we moved along, we made a more advanced hit counter that would not only count the total hits for the website, but actually go in and count the individual hits on each individual page. So I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial on building a PHP hit counter. As a reminder, the exercise files are available with the tutorial inside the OnTarget HTML5 store. I try to keep everything very, very reasonably priced. I'm basically just trying to recover the cost of running the website because, as I'm sure you can imagine, I mean, even this tutorial, which is only an hour and a half long, takes quite a while to develop and design and record and edit. So again, keeping everything as low cost as I can so that you can learn this new technology and I can just have the money I need to keep the website going. Comments or suggestions? I always enjoy hearing from the users of the website. Since FocusOnFlash.com was the first site I started 5 years ago, I have received thousands of comments from people that have viewed the tutorials. In fact, it was actually the people from that original website that convinced me it was time to branch out and to go into other areas because of the things I was doing on the web. They said, you know what, you teach Flash so well, you'd really do good doing HTML, PHP, MySQL, and they knew I was very focused on dynamic web design. So after a few years, they finally talked me into bringing this all together into one site for web development technologies. I love hearing your comments. If you got anything positive or negative to say, please drop me a line at mike@ontargethtml5.com. I love hearing suggestions on new tutorials. If you've got an idea for a tutorial, or if you think you can develop a tutorial and you'd like to have it posted online, feel free to reach out and touch base with me. I'd love to get as many tutorials as I can on this website. I really want to make this a one-stop shop for web development technologies. So I appreciate any comments that you have. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next group of tutorials.